Let's talk about avoidant partners, the ones who seem allergic to closeness, who pull away just when things are getting good, who guard their independence like a dragon guards treasure. If you've ever loved someone with an avoidant attachment style, you know how confusing it can be. They don't wear their hearts on their sleeves. In fact, half the time, it feels like their hearts are hidden in a vault with 17-digit security codes. But here's the thing, even avoidants fall in love. And when they do, deeply, truly, vulnerably, they begin to let their guard down. Not all at once, not in the grand romantic gestures we see in movies, but in subtle, powerful ways, especially in what they start to say. So today I want to give you 5 things that an avoidant will start to say when he's not just in it, but in it with his whole heart. Listen closely, because these phrases mean a lot more than they sound. I've been thinking about you. It sounds like such a simple phrase, doesn't it? But when it comes from someone with an avoidant attachment style, it carries a weight that most people don't recognize. Avoidants are not typically verbal processors when it comes to emotions. They're used to relying on themselves, maintaining their space, and keeping emotional intimacy at arm's length. So when they say something like this, it's not just a passing comment. It's a door slightly opening into a room they usually keep locked. This kind of statement is a moment of emotional transparency. For an avoidant, acknowledging that someone is on their mind is not just about expressing interest, it's about letting go of control. Because thinking about someone, missing someone, or longing for someone makes them feel exposed. It disrupts their inner narrative that they're better off detached, that closeness is risky, and that vulnerability equals weakness. So when they tell you, I've been thinking about you, they are actually saying, you've made it past my defenses. What makes this phrase so meaningful is that it's not necessarily prompted. It doesn't usually come after you've asked, did you miss me? Or have you thought about me? It often shows up in quiet moments when they reach out unexpectedly or when there's been a gap in communication. It's their way of letting you know that even when they were distant, they weren't disconnected. They were thinking, processing, feeling more than they knew how to express. There's also something important about the timing. Avoidants tend to reach this stage only after they've had time to reflect. Unlike more anxious types who might blurt out feelings in real time, avoidants process slowly, internally, privately. So by the time they say this to you, they've probably been carrying the thought for a while, weighing the risks of saying it out loud. It's a calculated reveal, which paradoxically makes it even more sincere. They aren't saying it for validation. They're saying it because it's true. Another layer to this is the unspoken message underneath. When an avoidant says they've been thinking about you, it implies that you've impacted them more than they expected. It means you've challenged their assumption that connection always leads to discomfort. It suggests that your presence has created safety, a sense of ease, or even curiosity about what deeper connection might look like. It's subtle, but it's there. A shift in their inner landscape. If you respond gently, without pushing for more or demanding proof, you'll often see a bit more openness follow. That first admission cracks the door, and if they feel safe, they might begin to open it further. You might start to hear about memories they've held on to, moments they replayed in their mind, or feelings they didn't know how to explain at the time. All of that begins with those 6 words, I've been thinking about you. For someone who fears closeness, it's a deeply vulnerable thing to say. And for someone who's hoping for connection, it's the sound of progress. What do you need from me right now is not just a question, it's a breakthrough. When someone with an avoidant attachment style asks this, it signals a fundamental shift in the way they relate to you. Avoidants are typically inward phemic when it comes to emotional regulation. Their instinct is to protect their own space, keep things predictable, and avoid situations that feel emotionally overwhelming. Tuning into someone else's emotional needs, especially in real time, can feel foreign, sometimes even threatening. So when they begin to express this kind of care, it means something important has changed. This question shows that they're beginning to look beyond themselves. It means they're willing to show up, even in uncertain or uncomfortable emotional territory. That willingness doesn't come naturally. Avoidants often fear that giving too much of themselves will lead to engulfment or loss of control. They've usually developed patterns of keeping a safe distance, not because they don't care, but because closeness feels dangerous. And yet, here they are, inviting you to tell them how they can support you. It's a question that also requires a kind of humility. They're admitting they don't have all the answers. For someone who thrives on self-reliance and control, this admission is no small thing. They're not trying to fix you, shut you down, or escape the moment. They're leaning into it. They're asking because they care enough to risk not knowing. They care enough to risk not being perfect. And let's be honest, emotional needs are often what make avoidants retreat. They worry they'll be expected to meet demands they can't handle or that they'll disappoint you. So when they instead choose to ask you what you need, they are giving you the steering wheel. They are saying, I'm here, I'm listening, you matter. That's vulnerability in action. This question also marks a shift from reactive to responsive. Avoidants can be quick to shut down when things feel tense or emotionally heavy, but when they start asking you what you need in those moments, it's a sign they're no longer just trying to survive the discomfort, they're trying to stay connected through it. That's a huge difference. It means they're beginning to understand that relationships aren't about avoiding conflict or discomfort, they're about navigating it together. Over time, this question might come with more follow-up. They may begin to anticipate your needs or offer things before you even ask. But it usually starts here. It starts with the moment they choose not to run, not to numb out, not to pretend everything's fine, but to face you, fully present, and ask how they can be there for you. That one question holds so much. It's the sound of emotional growth, of intention, and of a love that's starting to become less about protection and more about partnership. When you hear it, understand what it cost them to say it and what it could mean for what comes next. I want you to know how I feel, even if it's hard. When someone with an avoidant attachment style says this, it's not just an emotional admission. It's a pivotal moment in their personal evolution. Avoidants are not wired to comfortably share what's going on inside. In fact, their default programming tells them that keeping feelings to themselves is the safest, smartest option. Opening up feels risky. It means letting someone else into their internal world, a place they've spent years keeping private, even from themselves. To reach the point where an avoidant person says something like this, there's usually been an inner struggle leading up to it. They've likely rehearsed it in their mind, questioned whether it's worth saying, and doubted whether it would even be understood. Avoidants tend to have a strong fear of being misunderstood or rejected. Sharing their feelings risks all of that. So this moment, this phrase, it represents a deep breath taken before a leap. What makes it even more significant is that avoidants often don't fully understand or process their own emotions until long after they've happened. They may have been carrying sadness, confusion, longing, or even love without having the words for it. So when they finally reach out and say, I want you to know how I feel, it's not just an act of expression, it's also an act of discovery. They're figuring it out as they go. They're allowing their emotions to be seen, even if those emotions feel raw, incomplete, or vulnerable. They aren't saying it to manipulate or to get something. They're saying it because something inside them is changing. They're realizing that love requires truth. Not just action, not just presence, but honesty. And for someone with an avoidant style, honesty about emotions is often the hardest form of truth to share. It means surrendering their usual emotional self-protection. It means stepping out without armor. This moment is rarely smooth or eloquent. In fact, it might come out awkward, clumsy, even a little uncertain. But it's precisely in that messiness that the authenticity lies. If you listen closely, you'll hear the courage behind the words. You'll hear someone stretching far beyond their comfort zone, not for drama, not for attention, but because they've decided the relationship is worth that discomfort. And let's not forget, this kind of vulnerability doesn't always come with immediate relief. An avoidant person may feel exposed afterward. They may withdraw, feel embarrassed, or second guess whether they should have said anything at all. But still, they said it. They invited you into their emotional reality, something they rarely do. That invitation, no matter how cautiously offered, is sacred. So when an avoidant says they want you to know how they feel, don't just hear the words, feel the weight behind them. It's not just a sentence. It's a quiet declaration that you matter enough to be let in, even when it's hard. I was wrong. These 3 words carry tremendous weight when they come from someone with an avoidant attachment style. For most people, admitting fault can be uncomfortable, but for an avoidant, it can feel almost unbearable. That's because deep down, avoidants often equate being wrong with being weak, unworthy, or exposed. Their entire way of relating to the world is built on maintaining control over their environment, their emotions, and their vulnerability. So to acknowledge they were wrong is to step outside of that protective framework and risk being seen in a very human, very imperfect way. When someone avoidant says, I was wrong, they're not just admitting a factual mistake. They're choosing connection over ego. They're choosing to stay in relationship with you rather than retreat into defensiveness or isolation. And for them, that choice isn't easy. Avoidants often grew up in environments where mistakes weren't safe to make, where showing weakness meant losing affection or approval. So as adults, they may carry a deep, unconscious fear that if they admit fault, they'll be rejected or judged. That's why their go-to strategy is often to rationalize, minimize, or avoid the conversation entirely. So when they break that pattern and offer those words, they're showing incredible emotional growth. They're taking responsibility, not just because they think they should, but because they want to repair the connection. They're saying, in essence, you matter more to me than being right. That may not come with dramatic apologies or emotional outbursts, but it doesn't have to. In fact, avoidants tend to express remorse quietly. It may be a simple acknowledgement said carefully and without much embellishment, but don't mistake the calmness for lack of depth. For them, that sentence is a leap. And what's also powerful is that this kind of admission opens a new door for intimacy. In saying they were wrong, the avoidant is also saying that they care about your feelings. They care enough to reflect, to self-correct, and to move toward understanding instead of away from it. That's how trust is built, brick by brick, moment by moment. These aren't the grand romantic gestures that movies are made of, but they are the quiet markers of someone growing in love. It's also important to recognize that avoidants often replay their interactions privately. Long after the conflict has passed, they're still thinking about what they said or didn't say. So if they circle back and say, I was wrong, even days later, it means they've been processing. They've been working through their internal resistance. And instead of burying it, they chose to face it and bring it back to you. That takes both courage and care. So when those words come, listen closely, not just to what's being said, but to what it took to say it. For an avoidant, admitting fault isn't just a moment of accountability, it's a moment of connection. And in the context of a relationship, that kind of ownership becomes one of the strongest signals that they are truly invested in making it work. I want to make this work. When an avoidant person says this, it marks a profound shift in their emotional world. Commitment doesn't come easily to someone with an avoidant attachment style. At their core, avoidants often fear that closeness will lead to a loss of independence, identity, or emotional safety. Relationships can feel like pressure, like something they have to manage rather than something they can rest into. So for them to reach the point of saying they want to make something work means they've moved past fear and into intention. This phrase isn't thrown around casually by an avoidant. In fact, they often avoid making such direct declarations. They might show they care through actions or being physically present, helping with tasks, or even just sticking around longer than usual, but verbalizing commitment? That's not their go-to. That's why when they finally do say these words, they're often loaded with a deeper meaning. It's their way of saying, I've thought about this. I've thought about you, and I'm not running. What makes this phrase especially meaningful is that it speaks to effort, not just feeling. Avoidants may feel love, even deeply, but they don't always trust that love is enough. So when they say they want to make it work, they're acknowledging that relationships require participation. They're no longer just reacting or retreating, they're engaging. They're stepping into the idea that this isn't just something happening to them, it's something they're choosing. Saying this also means they're accepting the ups and downs that come with emotional closeness. They're no longer fantasizing about perfect conditions or holding on to the idea that it should be easy. Instead, they're accepting the real nature of connection. Messy, challenging, sometimes uncomfortable, but still worth it. They are beginning to understand that love is not about finding the perfect dynamic where they never feel triggered. It's about learning how to stay open when they do. It also signals a level of emotional maturity. Avoidants often pull away when things get serious because they don't know how to navigate emotional needs, both their own and their partners. But when they say they want to make it work, they're stepping into the discomfort. They're acknowledging that fear doesn't have to dictate their behavior. They're showing up even when the path ahead feels uncertain. Importantly, this phrase is a promise to try, not a guarantee of perfection. An avoidant who says this is likely still figuring things out. They may take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but those words mean they're willing to be in it, to grow, to learn, and to risk intimacy rather than avoid it. That willingness is everything, because love isn't about always getting it right. It's about choosing the relationship again and again, even when it would be easier to walk away. And when an avoidant says they want to make it work, they are choosing you and choosing growth. So if you're in a relationship with someone avoidant, or you've been trying to understand the mixed signals, remember this: progress doesn't always come in the form of sweeping declarations or constant closeness. Sometimes it comes in 5 quiet phrases that reveal something much deeper: the willingness to try, to grow, and to stay. When an avoidant starts saying things like, "I've been thinking about you," or "I was wrong," they're not just speaking, they're stretching. They're stepping beyond their usual comfort zone and into something real with you. And it may not always be smooth, but it is sincere. What you're witnessing is someone learning how to love, not from a place of fear, but from a place of choice. It's easy to focus on the emotional gaps in a relationship, especially with someone who tends to pull away. But don't miss the quiet moments where love is trying to break through. Those 5 simple phrases are not just words. They are invitations to be patient, to be curious, to meet them where they are without losing where you are. And if you're hearing these words, even in their earliest form, you're not just dealing with someone who's avoidant, you're dealing with someone who's trying. And in relationships, trying is everything. Thank you so much for being here, for giving your attention to the kind of love that doesn't always shout, but still runs deep. I hope this gave you clarity, hope, and maybe even a bit of peace. Take care of yourself, be gentle with your heart, and remember, real love doesn't rush, but it does reach. Thanks again for listening. Until next time,